Greetings, class. I'm here to talk about the Gregory Mantsios essay we read for today. A lot of our concepts talk about the American dream and what's holding the American dream back. And I think class struggles are something that really hold the American dream back. And what I'm going to do right now is just summarize some key components of this essay. One, this essay starts by saying that we don't like to talk about class in our country, and I think that's a pretty profound concept. And what the author says is that if you're upper class, you don't want to talk about how rich you are because you don't want people to know how rich you are. And he also says if you're poor, then you don't want people to know how poor you are. So you're not likely to talk about how rich you are, how poor you are. But if you're middle class, it's easier to say that you're middle class because most people identify with being a middle class country, which is very interesting. And then what he says on the second page, he says, one, we're not really a middle-class country because his argument is that if we are a middle-class country, then the majority of the middle class would have most of the wealth. But what he's saying is that that's not true. There's only a small percentage of Americans who have the wealth. So that's his analysis of it. He also says that class doesn't really matter. He says that class differences do matter. And his third myth that he conveys is that we live in a land of upward mobility, and he says that that's no longer true, that we have a lot of things that hold us back. So those are very profound statements, very strong statements that, in terms of what he opens his essay with. I really like some of the statistics he has. They're very powerful. I think all of us at one point have thought about or dreamt about being a millionaire. But on page 2, he says that it would take if you want to be a millionaire, only 1% of the population earn $1 million annually. So it's less than 1% of Americans are earning that much money. He says if you want to be a billionaire, these are pretty profound statements. He says that if you want to earn $10 billion, it would take the typical American earning $50,000 and spending absolutely nothing at all, a total of 200,000 years or 2,500 lifetimes to earn 10 billion. And if you think about it, that is so much money. And often we see how much Congress spends or how much our government spends, and we don't really think about it. We see 10 billion, 60 billion. We're like, that's not a big deal, but that's a lot of money. 50,000, earning 50,000 a year and spending nothing, 2,500 lifetimes, that's huge. Technically, if you really break that down, you'd have to earn 50,000 and live longer than the human species. The human species have only been around for 150,000 years, if you believe in evolution. So I think that's a very profound statement. Some of the other things he says, he has charts where he identifies Harold Browning, and Harold Browning has a lot of money. I think he's making $300,000 a year. He had exceptional tutors. He had a governess raising him. His graduation present was a BMW from high school. His first working age was 23, and he was a vice president of his company. In other words, a lot of people say he's very privileged. He had a very privileged upbringing. Harold Browning, the second person, or Bob Farrell, the second person, is making roughly $45,000 a year. He didn't have the same privileges as the other person, but he didn't fare too bad. His high school graduation present was a savings bond. Let's see, other things about him. His first job was 19. He was a service station attendant, et cetera, et cetera. And then Cheryl Mitchell, she's an African-American. She's a waitress. She had to drop out of community college. I think she's making, $13,000 a year, which is nothing. $17,000 a year is her annual salary. Her goal is to be a social worker. Her childhood ambition, it says in her own words, was to get out of the ghetto. The other two people, it was to become the president. Hers was just to survive. And if you look at the working age of all of these people, her working age was 17. So the poorer you are, the earlier you have to start working, which also I think leads to high school dropouts and things like that, because they have to work to support parents. And I think that's a hindrance to the American dream. And one of the most fascinating things I find about this whole entire essay, and there's some very strong statements, but Harold Browning owns 2 houses. He owns a horse ranch in Connecticut, and he owns a very nice apartment or condo in Manhattan at the very top of the building. a penthouse in Manhattan, so he's making a lot of money. And the essay says that Cheryl Mitchell, he probably pays someone more to feed his horses in Connecticut than Cheryl Mitchell makes in a year. So that's how much money he has. And there's a lot of different ways to say it. And one was, life's not fair, and it would be so great if we could all make this amount of money, but that's not the way it works out. And Harold Browning had a very privileged lifestyle. He grew up in a rich family. He inherited wealth that the other two people were not able to inherit. But at the same time, I don't think you can fault Harold Browning for that. A lot of people inherit money and do horrible, horrible things with it. So he's been able to hold on to that and invest in himself. But I think the essay, these 3 charts do a great job of showing class discrepancy. Very powerful statements. A couple strong statements he makes in this essay. He says that, one of the big statements he says is that the more money you make, the longer you're going to live. And I find that a bit controversial. So, for example, it seems like stress is one of the leading killers of people, and it contributes to heart disease, all kinds of different things. And I think if you're a lawyer and you're working long, long hours, you're a doctor working long, long hours, those are very stressful occupations. So I see some variance there. However, the one thing I can say is it does seem like people who have more money will have a longer life expectancy because they'll be able to afford better health care that other people wouldn't be able to afford. Also, if you're poor, which I've been many times in my life, if you're poor, your car breaks down, that's it for you. You might have to drop out of school. You can't go to work. You hit a roadblock in your life. But if you're rich, you don't really have to worry about that. If your car breaks down, you can get a rental car. So I think that it's this strife that leads, or it's the inequality between the two, that leads to healthier outcomes for rich people. And also, if you want to afford to eat healthy, sure, you could some people say, well, you just need to eat fruits and vegetables. But if you look at it, fruits and vegetables can be very, very expensive. If you have $5 and you go to 7-Eleven, what can you buy? If you want to eat healthy, you could buy, most students would say nothing. But I think a bowl of celery costs $5. If you want to eat junk food, you could buy 2 hot dogs and a big gulp. So, I mean, there is testament to say that if you want to eat healthy, it's going to be more expensive. And if you want to afford good health care and things like that, it's going to be more expensive, which does make sense that it would lead to a higher life expectancy. There's also a chart. I'm on page 6, and it talks about, page 5 actually, it talks about SAT scores. And I mean, there are outliers here. There are people who grow up in poverty, who don't have a high medium income, who do exceptional on the SATs. Let's put that out there. And there are people who come from rich families whose parents have to pay them to get into college, as we've seen recently. So, I mean, there's that. But I would say those are outliers. What this says is that if you're making less than $20,000 a year, your median SAT score is 1,300. If you're making more than $200,000 a year, your family, your median SAT score is 1,700. And on some levels, that does make sense. And the reason why, if you're rich, your parents can hire tutors to help you. You could take SAT prep classes. And if you're poor, you can't really afford those things. Also, if you're rich, you could take the SAT as many times as you want, because you have to pay for it. But if you're poor, that becomes a lot more challenging. And there's a couple other key points that I want to bring up. It says that there's one is very, very controversial. One says, and I'm not going to give my own take. I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this. But one of the things it says is that if you will remain in the class you're born into. So basically it's saying that Harold Browning's probably going to remain in the class he was born into. For him to become middle class or lower class, something devastating would have to happen. And Bob Farrell is probably going to remain middle class for the rest of his life. And Cheryl Mitchell, according to the essay and according to the reading, will most likely stay in poverty her entire life. I know that's a very, very controversial statement. I don't always agree with it, but I think that's a strong, strong statement. And I've had a lot of students agree and disagree, so I'll leave that for you guys to think about. And another thing, I would say that the American dream has always been to provide more for your family than is to make more than what your father had, right? To surpass the economic wealth of your father or your parents. And what it says that only 1 out of 4 or 5 Americans will be able to do that today. And I think the world around us has just become too expensive. The product goods have become so expensive, and the amount that the average American is making has not gone up in comparison to what we're having to spend to make it. There's a lot of things that go into that as well. This essay also gets into race and how that holds people back from economic prosperity as well. And it talks about African American females who have it the hardest. And if you look at the circumstances in minority neighborhoods where they don't have the same access to education, they don't have the same access to healthcare, mental health, all of these other things, I think that leads into holding them back from achieving more. And there's entire essays and books and videos you can watch on that. I'm just highlighting some of the key points, but I think that it's a big statement in our culture right now, but minorities do have more hurdles than other people. And I know some people might agree with that, and I'm not making a statement. I'm just leaving that for you guys to think about. That's in the essay, and I wanted to cover that. So I'm just summarizing one essay from our reading. I'll summarize the next one in a different video. But in terms of the American dream, I think there's some good concepts you could make. You could say the American dream is to live a long life, and it's hard. I like that argument. I think that's a good one. I think this one, it really gets into class discrepancies. I think that's a very good topic as well. What I'm going to do in another video, I just remembered when I was recording this video, usually I go over a brainstorm session with students to help them conjure ideas for an essay. So I'll do that. I'll do that in a different video as well. All right, thanks for listening.